Hey friends, here's your feedback video for Spiral 2. First off, we're going to look at evaluating functions, and things look a little bit funny because it's a Word document. But we're going to look at f of 5 first. I noticed that f is my equation. F of 5 means we're going to be plugging 5 into that equation. So we've got 5 squared minus 5 times 5. The first big mistake that I'm seeing is that 5 squared is 10 because it looks like you're doing 5 times 2. But in actuality, it's 5 squared is 5 times 5, so that's 25. 5 times 5 is 25. When I subtract those, I get 0. I also saw quite a number of you like literally having this and then crossing it out. And I think that's because it feels like 0 can't be an answer, but that's definitely an answer we can use. For number 2, we're looking at values for which h of a is equal to 0. That means that the height of our function is equal to 0. So I'm going to draw a blue line on my x-axis. That's where the height is 0. And I notice that this crosses my graph at 2 different places. I have to include both of these answers because I'm looking for all values. That means when we're looking at 0.5, because that's where 1 is, and if I'm looking at 2, both of those will give me a height of 0. I could write this either as just the numbers. I could write this as a or x, depending on if you cross it out with an x, is equal to 0.5 and x equals 2. I could also write this as h of 0.5 is equal to 0, or h of 2 is equal to 0. Any of those different ways would be totally fine to write this for a problem. The third part asks you to write these in increasing order. And you've got f of 3, and f of 3 means we're plugging 3 into this equation. So that's going to be 3 squared minus 5 times 3, which is 9 minus 15, which is negative 6. I saw a bunch of people lose the negative there, but otherwise that was okay. G of 3 means I'm looking at my table for where the input is 3, and we have a 3 for the output. And h of 3 means we're looking for the height of the graph when x is 3. I find where x is 3, I find the height, and that's going to be 1. What that means is that f of 3 is the smallest, because it's negative 6. H of 3 is the middlest, totally a thing. And G of 3 is the biggerest. Those are totally the right words for that. The next page is about domain, range, and intervals. One of the big things here is that I'd like you to use interval notation. And one big comment on that is that in general, your intervals are going to be written in terms of x coordinates. Range is the only interval that we have that is going to be written in terms of y coordinates. Okay, first up, domain. Domain, I'm going to find the lowest x value, which is negative 2, the highest x value, which is positive 4. The interval would be negative 2 to 4. I would use brackets here because my endpoints can be used, but if you don't, I'm okay with that. The range, I'm going to find the lowest y value, which is negative 1, the highest y value, which is positive 1, and I'm going to use brackets around those. For an increasing interval, this is one of the places that I began to see some particular problems. Generally, people were pretty good at identifying this part of the graph as the increasing part of the graph. The first thing I saw go wrong is that a lot of people wrote the coordinates for the lower point 1, negative 1 backwards. And the upper point 3, 1 they got okay. So they paired up the negative 1 with the 3, and we have to make sure that we're using x values only for this. So what we're looking for is the x value of the first one, the x value of the second one. The answer for this would be 1 to 3. Technically, both of those would be curvy parentheses, but it doesn't matter as long as you are appropriately selecting those numbers. For the next part, you're asked to identify one relative maximum or minimum. The obvious one is a relative minimum. That happens at 1, -1. When we're identifying these, we tend to identify them as the whole point. You also could have written, I guess this is not f, I think this is h. H of 1 is equal to -1, and that would have been okay too. Or at x equals 1, this graph has a minimum with a value of -1. Any of those things are fine. I really would like to see that as a coordinate, or at least some indication of both the x and the y there. Even just x equals 1, y equals -1. There's some question about maximums here, because the highest points of our graph are all these horizontal pieces up here. So a number of people wrote 3, 1, because that's the highest point, or a highest point, and that's totally fine. 0, 1 also would be a highest point, and that would be fine too. Any point along these values would be totally okay. Although I think the minimum is much easier to understand. And then finally, we're looking at whether or not this thing is a function. And for this, we're going to use the vertical line test and see if there are any times that we hit more than once with the vertical line. And as I go through here, I keep not hitting more than once, again and again. So yes, it is a function. And I could say the vertical line test, if I can spell. There we go. The other thing that I could say here is that there is only one input, or only one output for each input. And something like that would be appropriate here as well.